Welcome back to the CxO cast, an open conversation about leadership in scaling technology businesses. In this episode, Rory and I discuss how to build a world-class team and how to value experience against the drive and potential of step-up candidates. Plus, the age-old debate about how to balance process and creativity. If you enjoy this episode, consider subscribing to be notified whenever another episode comes out, and drop us a question or a comment below.
One of the things that we've spoken about before is this idea of people joining the C-suite and for some period of time, maybe even for the rest of their careers, having imposter syndrome. Maybe let's start by just defining what we mean by that. Kind of how do you think? How do you think of imposter syndrome? If someone said to you, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome, how would you interpret that?
Second guessing themselves.
Yeah.
I think having a healthy balance between, again, not knowing you're always right, and some of that is very, very important. But really second guessing yourself too much and being very hesitant about certain things. Those are probably two of the main characteristics I would see with people that are sort of, saying, can I do this? Can I not? It typically happens more with, let's call them step-up candidates, like people who have not done a job in the C-suite before or something like that. I would say that they take some time to learn how to manage people, take some time to learn, and they sort of second guess, should I have done it this way? Should I have not? All that sort of stuff. You always reflect on stuff. I reflect on stuff a lot.
I was going to say, is it a bad thing or is it just fundamentally part of reflection? No. Is it just too extreme a form of self-reflection?
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to characterize it. Maybe it is a more extreme form of self-reflection, because self-reflection is really important. But getting that balance right, in my view, between self-reflection, being able to be wrong, all those sorts of things, but having the confidence to be able to say, okay, well, I was wrong. I've reflected on it, but this is the direction I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's really hard. It's really hard to get that stuff right. And because, look, I'll be honest, I get it wrong in both directions all of the time. You'll get stuff when you're like, I was too dogmatic on that point. Or you might reflect on it and think, I gave way a bit too much on that point because I actually feel quite strongly about something given what I'm seeing and stuff like that. And so it's a hard balance to get. But that's
do you have strategies to kind of recognize it in yourself and kind of stop yourself making those mistakes? Have you developed kind of ways of thinking about it, or
no?
You start typically after the fact.
Yeah, I just think a lot about stuff.
Yeah.
Like I will, for me, going for long walks, either with the dog or not, and my wife, and generally just sitting in my office at home and just thinking.
Yeah.
That's some of the most important time from my perspective, is just sitting and just thinking.
Yeah.
And because you're always running, at least I'm a big believer in speed. You can spend a lot of time sort of strategizing about stuff and doing this, that, and the other, but you've just got to go. And you've got to go. Once you've decided you're going to go somewhere, you've got to go with conviction. You've got to go quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what the question was.
No, it was about imposter syndrome and how you kind of manage yourself through uncertainty. And I think what you're saying is exactly right, which is I think one of the underappreciated things in early stage businesses particularly is taking the time to reach a level of higher certainty is itself a decision not to do something for a period of time, and that time is valuable. Obviously you're in a position as an early stage business where you burn through capital over time, but also your competitors move quickly, the market moves quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Customers who are kind of greenfield today will not be greenfield tomorrow, and so the time is valuable. I guess building a team, though, you mentioned step-up candidates, building a team where people are being promoted into roles, where they're taking on new responsibility. Yeah. Maybe it's the first time in their career they're taking on this responsibility, something that's very typical in early stage businesses. Yeah. How do you try and kind of set them up for success? I mean, do you see kind of any strategies that you use to help them develop and help them, act rather than reflect excessively?
Yes. I wouldn't say that I've gotten this right, actually, over a long period of time from my perspective. I think that the more that I've done this, the more that I realised what that means and the points at which you should or shouldn't consider hiring a step-up candidate. So the things that I would consider now, if I were to hire somebody who had not done a job before, would be, what do you have around them? Like, so I always, not always, but I tend to think about the tech business from left to right in my mind's eye. So left being sort of engineering, then you move to product moves to marketing to sales moves to customer moves to, for example, finance to the people organization. So that's the way that I generally tend to think of the organization. And what I always think about is, if you're going to hire a step up somewhere, what infrastructure, what sort of people do you have around them? To be able to, because what I've noticed is when you hire somebody who is more experienced, the people around them will start to imitate the behavior and will start to mimic it to some extent, not necessarily in a negative, like in a positive way. So that's one thing I would always consider, is what infrastructure do you have in your team to be able to handle those sorts of people effectively? Do you give them, there's the words mentor and coach are often bandied around and used in the same breath. In actual fact, I think they're different things.
How so? I mean, how would you make that distinction?
For me, a mentor I would classify a mentor as somebody who has actually typically done the role before, and somebody that you would say, or somebody who's doing the role elsewhere or something like that, somebody that, your counterparts in other organizations. And those are people who, or somebody who's in a bigger organization that can say, okay, just having a chat, that sort of thing, about their experiences, all that sort of thing. That's where I see a mentor. A coach, typically, to me, is more of an overriding management concept that maybe is about, how you conduct yourself as a manager, how you go about giving general feedback, how, it's less role specific.
So more of a generalist.
Yeah, that's how I view it. And again, people could say that's complete nonsense. That's definitely not what a coach is. But that's just how I view it. And so I tend to favor more, because I tend not to promote people who I don't think have a lot of the fundamental aspects in the coach arena. Which fundamentally, a lot of the time for me, is communication. Can you communicate? Can you communicate well? Can you communicate frequently? Your values and those sorts of things. Those are the things that I generally look for. If you don't have those things, for me, you probably aren't going to be considered to be a step-up candidate anyway. So I tend to emphasize more the mentor role. For those ones, where people are like, how do you build a process for the team or something like that, whatever it may be. That's the stuff that I tend to focus on more. So those are the things that I would look at now. And the other thing is that as a manager, and this is on me, how effective are you at giving feedback? How effective are you at giving criticism, constructive criticism as well? And that's something that I've noticed with step-up candidates, is that it takes people, in my experience, around about a year to learn their voice as a manager. And what I mean by that is knowing how to be able to give bad news, knowing how to be able to give good news, knowing how, if you give bad news, how to keep somebody on side, when you hold a line, when you give way, all these sorts of points. Those are the things that I have found. It generally takes people about a year to really learn how to be able to say, I hear what you're saying. That's really important, and thanks for bringing it to me. And I really value your perspective, but we're going to be doing this. And this is why we're going to be doing it in this way.
It's just a kind of maturity of professional communication, really, to be able to bring an organization together where you have conflict naturally.
Yes. Yeah. But for me, the reason why that's so important is because I think a healthy organization is an organization that has constructive criticism and healthy conflict. If you do not have that, the way I always view it is that it starts with that foundation of trust again. And once you've got trust, then you can have constructive criticism and constructive debate. But what happens is, I always think of it as like a circle. The organization, and your goal is to make the circle bigger. But unless you can debate and sort of push the boundaries, say, actually, we should do it this way. I disagree with you. I think we should do it that way. You can't push the boundaries of the organization. You can't grow it into a bigger circle. And so that's why you have to have that foundation of trust and stuff like that. And that's where that, I don't know, that professionalism, all those points that we've spoken about previously really come in. But well, I'm interested to understand from your perspective today, like, because obviously, fairly recently moving into a partner role, although obviously being CFO and stuff like that before, how do you find it from a VC's perspective?
So both from a VC's perspective within VC and also within the companies that we work with, I for years always kind of come back to this concept of knowing what good looks like. It's like incredibly reductive and it sounds incredibly simple, but I think it is, which is a lot of people will kind of step up into roles and will be self-taught, either kind of managers or self-taught domain experts within, their field. They may be self-taught, and that's a kind of probabilistic process. You massively increase your chances of success if they have either role models within the organization or some other part of their life to understand what good looks like. And a lot of the time that might come from previous experience. They may have, worked in several really senior sales roles in other organizations, and so when they come to kind of lead a sales team in your organization, they'll know what good looks like because they've done it before. And I think it speaks a little bit towards what you were saying around having that kind of infrastructure around them, which is if you put someone in a position where they don't have that infrastructure around them and where they don't have the experience from other roles in other organizations, the probability that they will know what good looks like is just much lower. And so they may not fail, they may succeed, but the chance that they'll fail is just higher.
Yeah, agree with that. 100%. I think that concept of what good looks like. But I think what's interesting I've noticed with step-up candidates is even if they know what good looks like and they actually in themselves have a conviction, being able to communicate to 10, 15, 20 people in a team, or being able to communicate to 100 people in an organization, say, hey, these are my views. I've listened to what's happened. This is the direction I think we should go, and this is the conviction I have that I believe we should go in that direction, all that sort of stuff. Being able to say that even if other people maybe disagree with you at times, and finding that balance between holding a line, giving way on certain points, learning how if somebody's like people that don't agree with your perspective on certain things, but you still need to push it through and stuff like that, how do you manage through all those situations? And that's not easy.
And we spoke plenty about trust being the foundation for allowing people to have that conflict in a way that doesn't feel like a personal attack. But I think another thing that's really important to try and take off the table when you're having those debates is kind of role seniority. To some extent, experience is valuable, and someone might say, well, look, I've seen an example of this before. That's a valuable input. But saying, well, actually, we're just going to do it my way because kind of rank. Is a dangerous thing to fall back to.
I hate that sort of stuff. I always really, really try to avoid that sort of stuff wherever practically possible. Because, it's about that intellectual honesty point in the sense that if you're pulling rank, you've lost the argument.
You've lost already.
You've lost the argument because you don't have the intellectual capacity to be able to debate the subject. Otherwise, why would you be pulling rank?
Presumably because the data points to support your point of view don't exist, or they don't outweigh the other data points that are on the table, and so you're kind of left on the back foot. And
it doesn't mean that you as the CEO, you will have to have the casting votes to an extent, so you can disagree. But if you just do it because it's like, well, because I'm the CEO, I mean, that's a terrible argument. That is an awful argument. In my view.
No, I agree.
Do you find, I'm interested, do you find that, I mean, obviously don't name names to take my back, but do you find that does exist in other organizations?
Not often, and I would say kind of less. I mean, I definitely experienced that at the beginning of my career, and I definitely kind of recognize that trait in some organizations. I would say it's most typical of big organizations, though. I think there are fewer small organizations that can move that way without coming apart culturally much earlier, because you, as you say, you're moving at such a speed. You have to move at such a speed to stay alive as an organization at that stage, that if you can't bring people with you and have kind of cultural cohesion, the thing falls apart much earlier, because it just doesn't have the kind of stickiness to move at speed without falling apart. Whereas I think kind of much bigger businesses, it's in a lot of cases kind of culturally endemic, where, okay, a managing director makes this type of decision, a director makes this type of decision, a VP makes this type of decision, and there is very little kind of communication or debate of those decisions between groups.
Very interesting, that concept, though, about like the remits of decision-making authority and stuff like that, because what I've started to notice is that, and this, again, we'll probably discuss this more about startup versus scale-up, is that to become a scale-up and truly scale to hundreds of thousands of people, however big you want to become, a truly global organization, you have to have process.
Mm-hmm.
You can't not have process. And that is a very challenging thing, is finding the balance between process and allowing the freedom for creative freedom and things of that nature. It's really tough, because naturally what happens is, like, you have authority to be able to do this, this, and this. You have authority to do this, this, and this. That person does that. That person does that. This is the process. You do that to that person.
And you specialize, and therefore you achieve greater efficiency. But, you've lost so much of the kind of creativity and...
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
And that is fun. I realized that is why larger organizations cannot move at the pace of smaller organizations. It's that sort of stuff. But to be something that your customers and the market, if you're a publicly listed company, a publicly listed company is all about that stability and stuff like that, in my view.
That's it. Those processes give you a level of predictability, but as you say, can't sustain a higher growth rate. I mean, within our organization, we focus on this idea of MVP, minimum viable process. What is the simplest process that will allow us to achieve a commercial objective?
Right.
Now, that's because we're fewer than 20 people.
Right.
Like, we couldn't do that at 100 people. It just wouldn't work. So, and that's, I think, because our organization, the way that it exists, will always be smaller. I mean, VCs don't scale very quickly because of the nature of the kind of fundraising model that they're on.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. But it's the scaling thing. I don't actually have a good answer to this one. I genuinely don't have a good answer to this one, because it's a conundrum that I've thought a lot about, is when you're at 600 people, 700 people, and you need that process.
Yep.
You do need that process to be able to scale and make sure that, hey, if you bring a new person on board, they know what to do, how to do it, all that sort of stuff. If you invest, ultimately, as investors, my interpretation is, as a growth stage investor, right, what they want to basically see in the organization is, I can put some money into this thing, this black box. I'm not saying that they don't, let's just, for the sake of all the business, a black box. I'm going to put some money into this thing, and this thing will turn some cogs in this black box, and out the bottom of it, I'll get some more money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's very simplistic sort of view of it. Now, the only way, in my view, that you can actually achieve that, of money going in, more money coming out, is very repeatable process. Because when you go through fundraising rounds, as you all know, just like I do, they'll say, oh, well, show me your go-to-market model, and what your net revenue retention is. Show me what your CAC payback, and all these different things. These are all things that are helping them determine, how does that black box operate efficiently to be able to put something in and get more out of the bottom.
And fundamentally, the more predictable it is, the better valuation you'll get. The lower the kind of discount will be on that black box.
Exactly. And that's the challenge, is you're understandably incentivized to move the business in that direction.
Yeah.
But how do you keep the creative freedom and flexibility to be able to have an MVP, minimum viable process kind of mindset that enables you to move in a very agile way and things like that? I don't know the answer.
That feels like a question for an entire scaling episode at some point in the future.
Well, and wait for it. Because it's coming.
It's coming.
And it's gonna be good.
It's gonna be one of our top 5.
Thank you for joining us on the CxO cast. We hope you enjoyed the episode and gained some insights into the world of leadership in scaling technology companies. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, please subscribe and follow us on your preferred platform. Whether you're a founder, a CxO, or just an interested listener, we'd love to hear back from you, so do reach out to us through our social media channels. Until next time, keep scaling. This is the CxO cast.